And welcome to episode number 52 of Halfway There. You have found the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. And I have a very good one for you today. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this represents the first episode of season number 4 of Halfway There. You can get access to every single episode at halfwaytherepodcast.com. Just go there. You'll see the archive. You can click through and check out each and every episode. I'll tell you what, there's some really good things there. Guys, I've been just starting to add up a little bit of a count about how many years of experience we have on this show of walking with the Lord. Now, not counting this upcoming season. I've got a few episodes already in the can for that. We've got well over 1,400 years of experience of walking with the Lord. Now, let me tell you something. If you are looking for a spiritual mentor, if you've been out there kind of like I was for a long, long time, I was one of those guys who was just looking for people who would tell me what life was really like as a Christian. Tell me what it was like. How do I read the Bible? How do I pray? How do I, walk and live faithfully? How do I overcome the challenges of temptation and of, just bad relationships or difficult relationships and all the other things that come along in a life? And to be honest with you, I guess there were people over the years definitely who invested in me, but I never felt like I had the deep, rich well that I was looking for in terms of Christian experience. That I think is maybe part of why I put this show together. This show is that deep well of experience for today. Now you can go back and read a lot of the old saints, and I totally recommend that you do that. Maybe sometime we'll talk about who those people are, but this show represents at least 1,400 years of experience of walking with God. So I hope that you appreciate that, and I hope that it has had an impact on your life. Now, that's enough. Thank you. Please go to halfwaytherepodcast.com, check out the archives, sign up for the mailing list. You can get on that all right there. Today's episode, I'm very excited to bring to you. This is a guy that I've been following online for some time now. He has an amazing story. This is going to be, I think you're going to enjoy it. Some of his work is really profound and exciting. So he's going to share with us how he came to Christ, which has some interesting tie-ins globally. He's going to talk about how he overcame being a people pleaser, how he left a job in faith, not really having anything else to go to, and how God provided for him in that period, and what God's called him to do now. And I think that is going to be something that if you are somewhere in your 20s specifically, you're going to want to hear this. Maybe you even know somebody, if you're past your 20s, you know somebody who's in their 20s. This is a person who you're going to want to connect them with. He just founded his own company to speak to, and I would say offer direction to 20-somethings. His name is Paul Sohn, and he founded Qara, and he's going to tell us all about that. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Paul Sohn.
My name is Paul Sohn. I'm a leadership coach, author, and speaker. Currently live in San Diego, and I work with a lot of different people, but specifically millennials who are struggling with some of these fundamental questions of life, which is, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Mm-hmm. These questions about purpose, calling, vocation. I really help guide them to really discover what their God-given destiny is. And I've been able to do that and start this organization called Qara, Qara, which in its entire mission is to really unleash the potential of these 20-somethings to fully live out their calling in life. over the last few months, and it's been a awesome journey. And I I originally come from South Korea, so I call myself actually a 1.5 generation Korean Canadian American. I moved around quite a bit, but recently became a U.S. citizen.
Oh yeah, which is awesome. Well, okay. Well, tell me that story a little bit. How did you come to Christ?
Yeah, I love that question. So I came to Christ. I would say for me, the defining moment was when I was 14 years old. And to give you some context, I was born in a Christian family. My
Okay.
both my parents were Christians, and to even go even deeper, my dad became a Christian when Billy Graham came to Korea to
Wow.
do his crusade. And this was the largest gathering ever in the history of church. 1.2 million people, I believe, were present on that day. And I think it was the year of 1972, if I'm not mistaken. And my dad he recently graduated from high school, walked about 2.5 hours to attend this revival. And he heard about the gospel for the first time and really accepted Jesus Christ. So
Wow.
amazing story. And I grew up in a family, but honestly, faith was more of a tradition and something that our family ritual. It wasn't really personal to me until I decided to study abroad to Canada when I was 14 years old. And I went to a Christian school. I was staying with a Canadian homestay where all of them were Christians.
Yeah. What part of
And I
Canada?
got
Sorry, what part of Canada were you in?
this was Vancouver, BC.
Okay. So
And yeah,
go ahead. So you were staying there.
yeah, so I got to go to school. I got to go to this church and I got baptized. And there was one moment when, I was all by myself, right? And when you're 14 years old, you don't really know a lot about life. You're kind of scared. I was very scared about just what will happen with my life. But I got to I was on my bed at my homestay's family, and I was literally just thinking about all these different things that were happening in my life. And it dawned on me that, you know what, my family's not beside me, my friends are not beside me. Literally, there's no one to depend except God. And I really have to really seriously reconsider my relationship with God. And that became a turning point for me to really think about God as a personal loving father who loves me. And as I went to this Christian high school, every week we had chapel, we had Bible study. And the more I got to learn in the Bible about who God and Jesus is, that really transformed my life over the next decade, and even continuing through that process. It's been an amazing journey.
Right. Wow, that's really interesting. So, a couple things I wanted to mention. First of all, it's amazing to me. So, I've interviewed, let's say, roughly 50 people, and at least two or three of them, their lives were touched by Billy Graham, which
Wow.
I think is just, it's a small sample size, I guess, but it's just amazing to even see. One lady I talked to, her parents came to Christ at a Billy Graham concert or Billy Graham crusade in Des Moines, Iowa, which is my hometown. And she then had a direct effect on my parents, which is kind of interesting. So that I guess maybe something we sort of have in common. But what an amazing
Mm,
ministry that is. So I was that's interesting to hear. So this is really the moment then there in Vancouver when you felt kind of some loneliness. It sounds like you felt sort of alone, and you just said, "Hey, God is the only one who is actually with me all the time."
absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Felt very alone and felt very much like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm 14 years old, and
yeah,
for me, it was my first independence from every single person or thing that I would depend on for for my entire life. But now they're not there anymore. I can't just depend on my parents anymore. They're physically they're not there. So
Right.
I really had to really think about, okay, well, why am I here again? Why did I make this decision to study abroad? What is my purpose in life?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I really? Like, why am I here? All these fundamental questions in life that I started to have started, I think, when I came to Canada at age 14.
Yeah. And so you answered it with God, right? I got to have a relationship with Him.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, take me. What happened? What happened next? So you were in a phase of learning. It sounds like after that, where you were going through Bible studies and kind of absorbing who God is.
Yeah. I mean, to give you more context in terms of some of the things that I was thinking in my head and just who I was as a person, I was very insecure and self-conscious of just who I am as a person, because going into Canada, the Korean culture and the Korean education system is super competitive. Your
Mm-hmm.
entire identity is based on how well you perform at school. Your GPA becomes that defining point that determines your sense of worth, and your self-esteem entirely comes based on that. So for me, I was really literally just surviving. I was a mediocre student, um, the best, in Korea, and I never thought I would amount to anything. And
Mm.
honestly, the reason why I came to Canada is because I didn't have a lot of hope in myself, because I was never a great student. Therefore, I never saw a future in Korea. So there was not a lot of hope for me.
Right.
And because of that, I felt that I really wanted to restart my life. And going to Canada was my way of saying, okay, let's start fresh. Let's start on a clean slate where I can go to this North America again and try to figure this out again.
Yeah. Interesting. I think that culture of and so I don't want to presume too much, but the culture, it's a sort of shame based culture, right? Over in Korea, where
Very
there's
much.
where there's a lot of anyway, I've never been there, but I think that's really an interesting aspect of the journey. How did you find that affecting you as you came to Christ later? I mean, has that been something you've had to
Yeah,
deal with?
absolutely. There was so much fear of how people will view me, and
Mm.
will they judge me? Will they make fun of me? Will they like me, not like me? All these things. I became a people pleaser
Yeah.
as a result of that fear and insecurity. And the more I got to build an intimate relationship with Christ, what I learned is that the more I discover who Jesus is, the more I discover who I am truly, in terms of how
Wow.
God created me. And I mean, it's a continuing journey. I can't say
Yeah.
I completely know myself. It's a lifelong process. But compared to 15 years ago, compared to where I am today, literally, if you have met me 15 years ago and you would have met me today, I would have talked differently. I would have, showed up differently, because of how I was able to confront my fears, to be able to show up as just who I am, instead of simply just trying to become a people pleaser and somebody whose self-worth came from accomplishments, performance, or approval from others.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said there. The more I discover, more of who Jesus is, the more I know myself. I've had for a long time this kind of I gotta choose my words carefully. It bothers me when some Christians say that they just want to be like Jesus. I know that that's kind of language we get from the Bible. But what I love about Jesus is he's himself, right? And what I
Mhm,
want for me and for other people is to be myself in Christ, right? Myself in him, the
mhm.
person that he made me to be. So I love that you said that. Are there some examples of how he of how you discovered that? Like, were there any moments where you that you learned something more about Jesus and it kind of shed some light on who you were?
Hmm. I remember going to this retreat after my freshman year in college, and it was a retreat that my mom actually forced me to go. So it wasn't even a retreat I really wanted to go, but I went there. It was a bunch of college students around my age, and I experienced for the first time what the love of Christ when he died on the cross, that he was dying for my sin, for my life. And that was so real, because when I would read the Bible, it would make sense from the head level, but the heart level, I would not really feel it.
Yeah.
So as I was going through this retreat, and actually we were in the middle of a worship song and we're just praising and singing, and then suddenly it hit me that, wow, this is the love of Christ. And it was so powerful. I couldn't help but just cry, cry, cry. I couldn't stop. I was like sobbing like a baby, but
Yeah.
it was so happy. Like I was so joyful, so much at peace that, wow, a God would actually love me and he would just send his only son for my life. And it became so real. And every anxiety, every worry I had about life at that point just became so minimal, trivial, like it didn't even matter anymore. It didn't even matter. And it was just such a transformational experience that always I go back to help me realize that God is so real in my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, that is an awesome story. I love to hear that. You experienced the love of God in that moment
Absolutely.
in a way you hadn't ever before. See, I love those stories because I really think we have to have them. And I think your story is pretty common that our church services often are geared toward kind of a head knowledge of who God is, but we don't experience individuals that way, right? And God is a person, so we have to experience him emotionally as well, which it sounds
Mhm.
like you did. That's awesome. Were there any other events that really helped you grow in this, or is there or maybe,
Yes,
okay, good.
there's a lot of different events, and I could just say, a lot of the examples I gave you were more in the distant past, but just in the last year or two, I've been able to see a lot of different things of how God's been working in my life. And for me, it really started when I quit my job at a Fortune 500 company
Mhm.
where um, I was really making a really good money there. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was on the leadership path. I was, living the dream. I was building my resume. I was involved with so many different nonprofits, and I really was at a comfortable place. But deep inside, I felt restless. I felt there was something missing to my life. And like King Solomon said,
Yeah.
everything is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. And I was able to experience some of that. And that led me to kind of what I call a quarter life crisis, and how I came to understand that my definition of success was not God's definition of success. And it kind of changed my paradigm. And this led me on this 4 or 5 year journey of finding my calling, and ultimately led me to quit my job.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have a plan B.
W-
I
uh,
didn't have a job lined up. It was very much of knowing that God's got this, and God has things in control. But honestly, there was a lot of still fear. I couldn't pay the next month's rent, so I had to actually move in with my parents. I was also starting to write my book during that time, and didn't really know what would happen in the future. But a couple days after I quit my job, I got a phone call from this guy named Scott. And Scott and we've never met. In fact, we're only Facebook friends. But he calls me and says, Paul, I was actually thinking about you. and I just wanted to call you and just got to get to know you and see what's going on in your life.
Hmm.
So I got to actually share my entire life story with him. And he said, Paul, I really resonate with you because I also worked at a Fortune 500 company, left a very nice job in order to pursue my calling and my vision. And now I'm doing leadership development consulting work. And as soon as he shared his company's vision, I'm getting goosebumps at this point because it is literally the vision that God's given me. So long story short, he says, hey, Paul, I think you should talk to our CEO and some of our other colleagues in my company because this would be a great place for you to consider working. So I got to talk to all these different people, and then they give me this job offer. And honestly, I feel this is such a God thing, a divine appointment, because I was looking for about 20, 30, I was applying for 20, 30 different jobs, but every single one would get, I would never make it to the final process. So I was very discouraged at that point. But through this event, I was able to understand that, wow, God, I think, has divinely orchestrated this time for me to really to connect with these people. And I started working with them for 2 years, and it's been an amazing journey for me to work with them because all of them were Christians. They operated out of a very Christian principles, and it was part of a job where I was able to tap into my sweet spot, where I felt that I could apply my strengths, my passions. So for me to see just what God had planned, all of that beforehand, was incredible. Because had I not actually mustered the courage to pursue my calling and quit my job,
Yeah.
I would never have that conversation with my friend. So to understand that God loves me so much that his plans are so much better than the best plan that I can even conceive in my mind.
Wow, he had something for you already in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, interesting. That's a great story, Paul. I'm wondering, a lot of times people will have kind of a time when God feels far away or feels distant. I'm wondering if
Mm-hmm.
for you if that was during what you called your quarter life crisis, or not. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I had moments of just anger because I didn't really want to go work at Boeing, which is where I was working for about 4 or 5 years. I actually I wanted to work for another company, and it was a great company where I would have greater opportunity to grow, company that I would align with my values. And I went to the final interview and I didn't get it. So my plan B was Boeing. So I would go back. But honestly, I said to myself, well, the environment that I was in for Boeing, it's a blue collar manufacturing based environment. And in my mind, I was like kind of sour about the entire experience because
Hmm.
I always imagined I would work in a skyscraper in middle of Manhattan or Chicago, and I would view people who would be doing a lot of manufacturing type of work lower class than me. And suddenly I was in this environment where I had to adapt and work with people like that. And I felt very sour about it. And I would come to work disengaged. I would honestly feel like, I'm not going to be here long anyways. Let's continue to look for different jobs. I would not understand that there is a purpose behind why am I here. And, spiritually, it was also a very dark time in my life, just feeling pretty distant from God. I was focused so much more on my career instead of God that my job, my career became my idol. And climbing the ladder and finding ways that I could that was my main focus. So I had to go through a lot of different experiences where God will teach me that, Paul, like, you are really, really good in developing your career, but you're not really, really so good in putting your primary calling, which is my relationship with God, first. And I would compromise my faith in order to advance my career.
Yeah.
So that was big.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting to me too that so if your career was something of an idol, I don't know if you put it that way, but it was the thing you were focusing on anyway, um, that then you had to give it up in order to see God really provide for you.
Absolutely. Surrender.
Yeah.
That's a big part of my last 5 years of learning how to surrender my will, my egos, my dreams. The beautiful thing, though, is when I surrender, God's gift, dreams, God's vision, God's calling in my life is so much better than my dreams. It's just that it's incomparable.
Well, tell us a little bit about your book. Your book is called Quarter Life Calling, which I'm guessing comes out of this sort of quarter life crisis that you had. You've got some experience with this, so tell us a little bit about that.
The basic premise behind quarter life calling is that your 20s is that your defining decade, meaning that what happens in your 20s is going to have a ripple effect in the remaining decades in your life. But so many people in their 20s, if you ask a lot of millennials today, they feel lost, they feel stuck, they feel like they're in this constant wheel, like a hamster wheel or a rat race.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know where they're going. And I went through that journey myself, which led me to go through a quarter life crisis. And it's a real thing. I mean, midlife crisis happens in your 40s and 50s, but now with all these technology and the social media age and the influx of choice and opportunities that's ahead of us, a lot of people in their 20s are experiencing a crisis. And this book is for people, honestly, for any age, but specifically my heart goes for those who are in their quarter life, who are really trying to figure out their purpose in life. And I talk about different tools, exercises, activities that can practically help average 20 something who are wrestling with those existential questions in life to come up with a plan, to come up with a specific tools and activities that they can immediately apply in their own life so that they know that God has a calling and a plan in their lives, that they're not alone, that this time of a quarter life crisis can be a time to confront your fears and step into your God-given destiny.
Yeah. Where were you when I was in my 20s, Paul? You weren't born, probably.
Probably.
Well,
Still
no, I'm not that much older than you are. But I resonate with that because in my 20s, I had the same kind of thing where, actually, I told you I went to seminary and got a Master of Divinity, but I was at seminary. I did my undergrad and then went to school, and I dropped out because there was so much stuff going on personally and my family and whatever, but I just couldn't handle it. And I thought, wow, what am I supposed to do? So I spent 3 years. We had 2 kids in that time period and just wonder what was going on. And in that exact same place. And I can see where if I'd had a guide like this or something, that could kind of direct me to think a little more clearly about the direction I was going, that God really could have used that in my life,
Absolutely.
You mentioned your organization, Qara, now. Tell us a little bit more about how that factors into this, your work with millennials.
Right. So Qara is actually a Hebrew word for those who are wondering. It means calling. It means actually to call. And one of the beautiful definitions of this name, Qara, is also means to name. So if you think about Abraham becoming Abraham, his meaning changed, his destiny has changed. He became a high father, but from a high father, he became a father of multitudes. And there is such a interesting thing, they call it normative determinism, It's a technical term, but basically we become the person that we are based on our name. And I believe that so many people live their life and die without even realizing what their calling is. Only a few people are able to actually not only discover their calling, but live it out in their lives. And the entire mission of this organization called Qara is to empower young people to really discover their calling and live it out. So we do offer coaching, offer workshops, offer online courses, later on even creating a boot camp and conferences where people can come and experience transformation of their identity, because so many people are living under false identities, what I call lie identities. The lies
Mm.
about our identities. And being able to really discover ourselves and redefine ourselves in Christ will help us be able to step into our God given calling and therefore liberate us to live a life that God has destined us to live. So I feel that's my vision and my heart that God's given me to empower and equip and inspire a new generation that lives that out. So we don't have to compare ourselves anymore, that we don't have to always live with these limiting beliefs that haunt us and cripple us from truly living out and being fully alive.
Yeah, that's a great vision. Give me an example of somebody or some way that you've seen this work out for in somebody's life.
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of coaching, and I have a lot of clients who are very ambitious, very driven, but also very broken. But they don't realize that their brokenness, without being completely liberated from it and addressed, it will continually come out of their life, whether it's their professional life, personal life, spiritual life, and it creates dysfunctional relationship. And as I have these conversations and guide them, questioning them, really, like my role I see is really a questioner, asking thought-provoking questions to help them understand, why do they behave the way they do? Why do they show up this way? To really be able to create more
Mm,
self-awareness and understand what is the source of why they behave the way they do.
yeah.
If there are certain fears and things that come up, why is that happening? So being able to guide them and to help them create these aha moments and breakthrough moments is incredible, because for them to go through this process and then to come out of it feeling like they're not only more confident in who they are, they understand that this is truly the gifts, the passions, the desires God's given me, and I want to be able to leverage that and use that for the kingdom, and to see that they're doing things practically to create results. Um, that's awesome for me. Like that's what
Yeah.
makes me fully alive.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So, if you could look back, like when you're 70-year-old Paul, so what's that, 40 years from now or so? What do you
Mhm.
want to see that is the impact of this generation, and maybe that the movement that you start with Qara?
Yeah, I love that question. Um, Honestly, I want to be someone that people would say, Paul's life speaks for himself. That
Hmm.
he may not be the most distinguished person, the smartest person out there, but he is the most authentic person, the person who has lived out his calling. One of my favorite verses is in Acts, where they describe the life of King David and said, King David, he lived out God's purpose in his own generation. And that's what I really want to be known as the person who lived out my purpose in my own generation. And my purpose is to help unleash this new generation as leaders, but leaders who are grounded in their calling and identity, not by just the materialism and the performance or the resume or the outside superficial stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but they're grounded deep, deep, deep by knowing who they really are in Christ. So, whether it's my church friends or whether it's my family, whether it's people that I've met all throughout the next 40 years of life, that they would say, Paul has impacted me that way so I can truly step into my calling.
Yeah. The calling of others is really your calling.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's awesome. I love something you said just sparked me to look up Ephesians 2:10 here, which
I love that
yeah,
verse.
is one of my favorites because this whole idea that God has prepared works in advance for us to do. Like there are things that he wants us to do. There's things he wants. So he created you to speak into other people's callings and to help liberate them from all of the fear and things that would hold them back from engaging. And I love what you said about how the 20s are sort of a defining decade. I think that's true, man. You get locked into something, when you're young, you can try things and whatever, but once you get locked in, it compounds over the decades. But to think that God has prepared something and to help people find those things that they're prepared, that God has made for them to do, I mean, that's a huge, huge calling. And it's really awesome.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, that's cool. Wow. Well, I think that's great. Thanks for sharing the story of kind of how you came to this. I'm kind of encouraged that it didn't come just with a lightning bolt, but really through your own adversity. I think that's great. I want to ask you one more question. What are you learning? Maybe we've already answered this, but you tell me. What are you learning about yourself as you're leading others through these things? Like, are you discovering more confidence and more just peace and joy, or how would you put that?
Yeah, I'm learning a lot of things about myself these days. I'm actually in the middle of a book tour where I'm going to city after city, speaking to a lot of millennials about this subject. And I'm realizing more and more these days how broken I am. I'm realizing how there's strength in vulnerability. That the more I become authentic, not think about how others think of me, but truly just be myself, speak from my own weaknesses instead of this person who seems to have got everything together, who is an author, a speaker, a coach, and living the dream. That's what the Hollywood portrays. But honestly, most people don't talk about this, but
Yeah.
pursuing your calling is hard. Pursuing your calling is frustrating. It's difficult. But at the heart of it and beyond the surface of that, there's a sense of peace and joy because this is what God's called you to do and called you to be. So I'm learning that in spite of my weakness and in spite of my brokenness, God even uses that for His good. And God uses those stories to embolden people, to encourage people, to inspire people. So my goal these days is just to be real, authentic, vulnerable with people. And that, what I learned, is the best way to connect with people.
Yeah. When have you been vulnerable with somebody that maybe you weren't sure about doing it and you did anyway?
Well, I have a choice every single time when I meet with people to either be vulnerable or not. But for me, honestly speaking in front of a big crowd, to be vulnerable there is a big challenge because I don't know these people. A lot of people, I'm just meeting them for the first time. They might use what I tell them, my stories. They might even put it on social media. They could just, quote certain things I say, and they could talk about me in a negative way. Like, I have absolutely no control of how people respond. But honestly, if I have to be real and honest with just my calling, I just have to be authentic about it. And some people may not even buy into it. They may not even like what I'm saying, but I just have to say it because that's my life. That's my story.
Yeah.
So every single time I get up, I have a chance to do that. I really pray. I pray to God and say, God, I feel honestly scared. I feel very afraid, but I know, God, that you have given me this opportunity to to help others discover their calling and to know that they're not alone. So God, just let me be real. Let me just be myself. And every time I make that prayer, what I'm blown away is the fact that God always is with me and strengthens me and helps me go out and speak to these people, and I'm able to just be myself.
Yeah.
And I just love that when he does it.
Dude, so I hear in that, a real journey from where you started that we talked about earlier, of being real concerned about what people think, and certainly having that ingrained into you, to now where you have to kind of release that every time you get up to speak. I'm just going to be faithful to who I am. And there's power in that. There's huge power in that. God uses that tremendously. But yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. All right. Well, anything else you want to leave us with before we get going here?
Yeah, I mean, anyone here who's listening who is thinking about their life, purpose, calling, and still unsure about that, just know that you're not alone. You're not alone. And if you need help, feel free to contact me. I'd love to have a conversation with you. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram. You can find me on my website, paulsohn.org or Qara.org. Those are two of my websites. Read some of the content out there that I think will really help you with some of the struggles that you might be having. But I want to make myself available to you guys because this is it's a real battle. It's a real season of questioning, and that's not always so easy. I understand that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I will have links to all of that in the show notes on this page. So you can you'll find it on the Halfway There podcast Facebook page, or just go to halfwaytherepodcast.com and find Paul's page. It's right there. Everything's linked up. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate you sharing your story.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Hold on.
Wow, Paul, thank you so much for sharing your story. I enjoyed so much of that. Definitely can resonate with many of the moments that you've been through, and especially the calling that you have to help people in their 20s figure out what God is calling them to do and set them up for a life of service. That is awesome. All right, guys, so I want you to go out to halfwaytherepodcast.com. Check out the show notes page for this particular episode with Paul. I've got links there to all of the resources. Yeah, you can find Quarter Life Calling at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and definitely go and check that out, especially if anything that Paul said today resonated with you. That, I would say, is your next step. Get the book and check it out and see some of the things that he's had to share there in more detail, okay? Guys, thank you so much for listening. I'm excited, man. This is the 4th season of Halfway There. It is off to an amazing start. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate you sharing your story with us. Next week, we have an episode that I can't wait to bring you. I think you're going to love it. How does somebody love you to Christ if you don't even speak the same language? Well, we'll answer that next time. Until then, friends, keep the faith.